Hey, Schlaf.
Hello.
Thank you again, Schlaf, for coming on the show today. And I hope it's okay if I call you by your nickname. It's a pretty
Yeah, of
prolific
course.
one. Um,
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
sure. So I want to talk about a number of things. You're well known as a VC, recently made the transition to coaching. Definitely want to talk about both sides of that and everything in between. But first, for people who are less familiar, would love to get your background. A pretty interesting story. So, and I've been fortunate to hear it, but just would love to hear from your perspective, kind of the overarching story.
Yeah, well, I'll keep it at a 30,000 foot view, and then we can dive around and see where the conversation takes us. So I've been in technology for almost 2 decades. It's bizarre to even say it that it's been that long. I started my career at Microsoft in the early 2000s, where I was part of a sort of one of these leadership rotational programs where every 6 months I was rotated into a new area of finance and strategy. I then spent a few more years after that program doing M&A and strategy for the Microsoft business division. I eventually wanted to move closer to family and friends. I'm originally from Boston. I always felt that everyone should do at least 1 year a tour of duty in New York City. And so I moved to New York. I joined a startup called Massive. It was an in-video game ad network. That was a great experience. And then, I had just such a unique opportunity to move home to Boston a few years later to work for the Kraft Group. They own and operate the New England Patriots, and my job there was multifaceted. It was everything from looking at venture style investments, incubating new companies, looking at acquiring established businesses, and everything in between. And I like to say that I think my title at the time was director of new ventures, but it was like special projects. And so I did that for 3 years. And then my wife and I weren't married at the time. We initially met in New York. She and I just were really itching to get back to the city as much as we loved Boston, and I enjoyed my dream job. And I joined a startup called Stickybits, which was a mobile barcode scanning application, one of the very first ones. So this was around 2009, and it was backed by Chris Sacca and First Round Capital and some other great investors. And for a whole bunch of reasons, it didn't work out. And we ended up pivoting to Turntable FM. And I lived through that whole pivot, but ultimately didn't want to be in the music business long term. And so I ended up joining Lerer Hippeau Ventures, where I was a principal there. I was effectively the first non-partner hire that the firm had made. And it was just such an amazing opportunity and experience. In the 2+ years I was there, we made over 100 seed stage investments, plus, call it a dozen or so follow-on investments. And that was really my first foray into VC, even though I had a little bit of a taste of it at the Kraft Group. The Kraft Group was really a hybrid between operating and investing, whereas this was my first pure VC job, which I was working 70, 80 hours a week and burning the candle on both ends and just loving it. I then had an opportunity to join RRE Ventures, which is one of the pioneering venture capital funds in New York City, started by Jim Robinson and Stuart Elman. At the time, I was really interested in seeing whether I wanted to focus on seed investing or Series A. RRE has been a traditional Series A firm, so a much different style of investing than I had been doing at Lerer. And interestingly, around that time, a few things happened. First is I got sober. The second was I found meditation. Third, my wife started a company. And this whole confluence of events ultimately led me 4 years later, after joining the firm, to walk in and quit my job. And when my partners asked me what I was going to do, I said, honestly, I don't know. But I had been thinking about coaching for a while. as something I would do later in life. And because I didn't have any kids, because I was going to take a little bit of time off, I felt like it was the perfect time to go ahead and develop that muscle. And so that was about 3.5 years ago. And I haven't looked back. And now what I'm doing is I kind of wear two different hats. My primary day job is operating High Output, which is a boutique leadership development company where I almost exclusively work with early stage founders. And so that's anyone from, just getting started all the way through, call it Series B, maybe Series C, so call it up to like 100 plus employees. And that's one of my main responsibilities and tasks. And right now I'm just an army of one there. And then I operate a small little angel fund. And so in a given year, I'll make anywhere from, call it 15 to 20 angel style investments. And then I guess I have one other side hustle going on, which is building out the founder library, which is a portal of just, packed full of resources for founders, everything from blog posts and templates and presentations to help them, as I like to say, is launch, scale, and lead. So anyhow, that's a mouthful, but that's effectively my path to what I'm doing now.
Yeah, I appreciate the background. It's a great story, and I like that you took the time to walk through kind of each step and sort of why you made some of the moves along the way. There's certainly a lot to unpack there. I might dig back further later, but I want to start with one of the more recent things you talked about. You walked in and quit your job and kind of, asked what you were going to do next. You said like, look, I don't know. That's something that I can sympathize with. I did the same thing about a year ago, different stage of life maybe, but walked in and quit my job after 2 years post grad of investment banking. And my boss said, why are you leaving? What are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. It's just kind of time to move on for me. And now I'm kind of developing one day at a time, 1 week at a time, whatever it might be, what I'm doing now. And there's not really a great word for it. And it sounds like you're in a similar boat where, you're working on high output, you're investing, you're building this founders library and just kind of following your passions in all of these different aspects of life. How did you kind of build the conviction to quit without a firm idea of what you were going to do? And then how did you develop what you were actually going to do as time went on?
Yeah. Well, I should say I actually omitted a brief stint. So I also spent about a year and a half first as a venture partner and then a partner at RRE Ventures. So I had left RRE. I took about 9 months off, and which is when I went and trained as a coach. And I've known Ben and Brad at RRE for a really long time. And they invited me to just join as a part-time venture partner. And then that eventually led to them convincing me to join full-time. And so I'd say I quit my institutional venture job twice. It took me twice to realize that wasn't a good fit for me, that style of investing and job in general. And so the first time, I think back to when was this? This was the winter of 2017. So call it January, February of 2017. My wife and I were just starting to think about starting a family, and we're getting ready for that. And we went away to New Zealand as kind of like our last big trip before we had a family. It was something that we always wanted to go. And I remember being on the road on that trip and because we were driving around the country for almost 3 weeks, I remember saying to her and eventually coming to the decision that I was going to make a change, actually when I was driving in the South Island. And it was just this moment. I wouldn't say it was, I just sort of had this epiphany, and I had been unhappy as an institutional VC and at that firm for a while. It just wasn't I just felt completely out of alignment. And I remember not really knowing what I was going to go and do. Fortunately, I had saved up a little bit of money over the years so that I was able to take a little bit of a risk. And interestingly enough, I didn't go and talk to other firms. In addition to the coaching, I thought I was actually going to go and start my own fund. And I was going to go out and raise. I even came up with a name. I put together all my pitch materials. I got a few $1 million of commitments from friends. And I think the idea was I was going to go pitch and try to raise like a 15 to $20 million solo GP institutional fund. And I was actually really, not that I didn't want to go and do that. I just felt so much like internal resistance. And one of the things that I really struggled with is anytime you go and raise an institutional VC fund, you're really signing up for at least a 10-year commitment because of the way that the fund cycles work. And I just asked myself, like, do I really have the conviction that this is what I want to do for at least the next 10 years and likely longer, because companies are staying private longer than they did in previous generations. And so it just wasn't clear to me that this is what I wanted to devote the next phase of my life to. And so that was the first big thing. And the second is I wasn't necessarily sure that I wanted to do this by myself. And frankly, I was freaked out. I wasn't necessarily really committed to this idea yet, and I didn't have the self-confidence. And so that was the first time I quit. And I think when I joined Primary, part of it was I was still really new into coaching. So I was just starting to work with a few clients, but hadn't really I didn't have the confidence that this was something I could go and do full time because I was still very much in training and had my training wheels. And then that was the first. And so jumping into Primary was perfect because it, in some ways it was a flight to comfort and safety because I knew the world of institutional VC fairly well. And I could hit the ground running while also keep dipping a toe in coaching and continuing to build that muscle. But after doing the coaching for over, call it a year and a half after I joined Primary, I had finally gotten the confidence that I knew that I could go and raise a smaller fund on top of AngelList and invest in what I like to say is like a very non-institutional way. And then the second was that I could really begin to build high output. And for me, I honestly had no idea that A, it was going to be called high output, B, what it was going to entail. And I would be lying to you if I told you that even right now I have all the answers. I'm sort of just taking it as it comes. And that doesn't mean that I don't have a vision and I'm planning it. But, I ultimately decided to leave Primary on a hunch. And I love this, I'll tell a quick story. I was listening to a podcast with Jim Collins from the author of Good to Great, where he was talking about this metaphor that he uses of what he calls, bullets in cannons. And he said, if you have a certain amount of gunpowder on a table and and he was talking about this in relation to decision making. Do you put all that gunpowder into a cannon where you only really have one opportunity to hit the target, or do you pack it into a few bullets, sort of calibrate the wind and the quality of the gun and all these things, and then put it into a cannonball? And I felt like when I was at Primary, I had been collecting all of this data where people were starting to reach out about coaching. And so I was able to gather a lot of data points and almost de-risk the decision to go out on my own, because I had been shooting bullets as opposed to cannons, where, maybe from the outside, it looks like it was this big decision that I made, but I was collecting all these data points over the course of a year and a half, even longer, that ultimately gave me the courage to go and do it on my own. Now, I'll stop and say one last thing. I think I have the most supportive wife in the world, and she was incredibly patient with me in those 3 years as I was like walking through the desert, trying to figure out what I was ultimately going to do with my life. But even when I was contemplating leaving primary, she's like, the last time you were in this transition and you were just starting out on coaching, you weren't even really sure what you wanted to do, and you were stuck because of the fear and all these other emotions I was feeling. And I just, by this point, I knew myself so well that I assured her that I'm like, this time's different. I know exactly what I'm going to go do. And like, that's been almost a year from now. It's almost been a year to the date. And, I haven't looked back, and I've just been sprinting.
It's really interesting what you say about de-risking what seems like a huge risk to others. Really, you had become comfortable with over a year plus of kind of working towards it and considering it and practicing coaching with these different people. I sympathize with that again because uh, my decision, some people, like some of my friends are like, what are you doing? You can't just quit your job without a job. But this wasn't something that I like decided overnight. This was something that I had been thinking about for months and timed it so that like my deals were at a good point where I could leave without kind of screwing the group. I'd just been paid my second year bonus. My lease in New York had run up, so I actually got a one-way ticket to Italy and ended up traveling for a few months. And the reason I think I was comfortable doing that was because after my freshman year of college, uh, miserable year for me, I ended up dropping out to start a company, ended up failing with that after about a year, decided to return to school and ended up being able to go to a better university because of all of it.
Hmm.
So I was comfortable with taking this perceived risk and realizing that really, I think Tim Ferriss says it well. He talked in his book 4 Hour Work Week about how a lot of things that people fear are actually a lot more reversible than they might think. So like
Hmm.
for you, I'm sure you could go back into VC if you wanted, after, even tomorrow. Like it might not happen tomorrow, but within the next year, I'm sure you could find yourself a job within VC. Uh,
Oh, yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And the idea that decisions are there are very few decisions in life that aren't reversible. And I think that like I think life context and circumstances matters a lot. I was very fortunate that I was able to do this before I started a family with my wife. And, now that I have a 2-year-old, I think the calculus and the decision making might have been different given this situation, but the timing was really perfect. And even in what I'm starting to realize, at least with my own life and experience, is that oftentimes the initial decision to make the leap is actually more difficult than making the leap. And yeah, I've just, and the other thing that I should say related to, irreversible decisions is that most of the decisions that I have made in the last 3 years have been, and part of it is probably because I'm an Enneagram level 7, which is the enthusiast, but like the way that I've designed my life is actually to optimize for optionality and potential paths. And so, sure, I'm coaching with, call it 70% of my time right now. I'm also angel investing, but and I'm working on Founder Library, but each of those paths could be its own thing, right? And in a year from now, I could decide, hey, you know what? I actually want to go and do the institutional VC. I'm going to go, instead of raising 5 million for the second fund, I'm going to go raise 10 to 20, right? That's a path. I could say, you know what, I'm not going to go raise a second angel fund. I'm just going to go and exclusively focus on coaching and leadership development. That's also a likely path. There's another path, which is the Founder Library that I'm working on actually evolves from being a side project into something that is that might eventually evolve into a company. And so for me, what I'm trying to do is, in some ways, I'm spread incredibly thin And I work, 7 days a week, though I do feel like I have a tremendous amount of balance in my life because I'm not working, 12, 13 hours a day. But because I'm making all of these bets and that they're all symbiotic and related to each other, that I feel it just gives me a lot of optionality, and it allows me to take more risk.
Yeah, and another thing that's important, I think, is that all of these bets are pretty much on yourself, right? You're not depending on external people or anything like that. You're starting your own activities in all of these different dimensions and can kind of, reel them in or push them out to the degree that you feel like focusing on them. Is that kind of right?
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
So all these things that you have on your plate, do you think you mentioned that you don't have like a 10-year vision necessarily? And I certainly don't blame you. I like taking things short term, as we can see with kind of COVID as one example. It's like pretty silly to plan, in my opinion, to plan too far out, except for the things that sort of absolutely demand it. Um, do you day by day kind of set your focuses on one kind of mission or another, or do you kind of have habits that just kind of pull you forward in all of these different dimensions between the high output library or high output consulting or coaching, and then the founder library and the investing, or is it sort of built into a program where you're able to allocate time to all of these different things?
It's a great question. So I spent a lot of time as I was leaving primary to identify my mission in the next phase of my life. And so right now, my personal mission is, and it's written on my website, and I probably, I get sick of hearing myself say it, but my mission is to help founders bring their boldest visions to life and evolve into extraordinary leaders. And so pretty much everything that I do has to somehow level up to that mission. And so when I think about my coaching, the investing, founder library, all of those align with that overall mission. So I think that's usually the first filter. And I've spent a lot of time with my coach. I work with an awesome coach he's more of a performance coach and productivity coach. His name is Chris Sparks, and I've spent a lot of time with him over the last 3 months. I just started working with him at the end of the summer, and he is incredibly good at getting me to focus and really define what he and I have been calling like what's in the box. So even within those three, because I have so many things flying at me in terms of, coaching clients, new opportunities, admin, we've basically defined what's actually in my box. So what are the things that I say yes to, versus what are the things that I punt on? And so I'm constantly looking at that list and tweaking it. And so it really helps me be able to focus on the things that will help me move all these three projects forward. It's not easy. And, I think that I'm sort of rambling, but, I think where we were heading with this is what are the habits that allow me to make progress on these three disparate projects that are all somewhat related.
Yeah, and by no means do my questions need like, specific answers, whatever you're kind of inspired to speak about. I encourage you to do so. And that's really an interesting take. I think it is super valuable to take the time to define your own mission or purpose, whatever you might call it. I did that myself for the first time several months ago. I don't know, was this the first time that you really sat down and thought, okay, what do I want to kind of drive my everyday?
Yeah, exactly. And it was an unintentional way to start to define what's in the box and what I say yes to. So for example, like I'm very deliberate about working with early stage founders, right? opportunities to work with executives at larger companies. And I've said no to them because, I want to focus. And so, I think being able to really narrow the focus down is important. And so like establishing that initial mission has been helpful. But in order to work on, 3 different things at once, it does require a lot of focus and habits. And so for me, I think some of the things that I really focus on and hone is like, for one, is like absolutely my meditation practice, so that I'm very aware of the things that are coming at me and in my inbox and how I'm feeling in a given moment. So I'm really in tune with the things that are, and the opportunities and the people and the activities that are giving me energy or taking it away. And so I think meditation, just overall, like, to me, it's the thing that's the foundation of this. And so I think that's definitely the one habit that I wouldn't say I meditate every single day, but I would say usually 6 out of 7 days a week. And then the other habit is really spending a lot of time just at the beginning of the week. And I'm not crazy about it, honestly, but I always have a sense as to what I need to accomplish this week. And I try at the end of every day, and this is something that I've worked with Chris on, is at the end of every single day, I try to just quickly review my task list for the morning. And so it's always very clear before I go to bed, like what are the 2 or 3 things that I need to achieve in the morning, so that I don't have to waste any time. I sit down at my desk and I'm ready to rock. And then there's also another thing that a habit that I've implemented recently towards the end of the summer. I actually conducted a full postmortem. I have a half. I have a half blog post written, and it's the Extreme Makeover Work Edition is the name of it. But I basically went through like the 5 dimensions of my work life, everything from like habits and behaviors to my office, and each had like a series of questions. And coming out of that, I'm not a big believer in, even though it was this like very involved question, reflection and journaling exercise to like really get to know myself and how I work. Coming out of that, I really only implemented 2 things. And the main thing that I implemented was no meetings before 11 o'clock. And that's something I've shared over Twitter, which is just basically giving myself the time and the space every morning to just sit down and do the things that actually need to get done that day. And if I don't get anything else done after that, then, I at least got the most important things out of the way. And so that has just been such a game changer for me, because when I was working in institutional venture capital, I was basically in back-to-back meetings from 8 a.m. to usually at night, 10 p.m. And then I would wake up and go to the gym and just do it all over again. And that obviously, A, wasn't super sustainable because I was ultimately getting burnt out, and B, I was really unable to like get a whole lot accomplished other than just taking lots of meetings and deploying capital. And for me, in this phase of my life, I want to be able to create more. I want to blog. I want to launch projects like Founder Library. I have a bunch of other projects that I've thought about and that could, I think, become eventually collaborations with other people. And so I think by giving myself this time and space in morning has been really powerful. And for the listeners, the way that I typically structure the morning is usually I give myself, we have a daughter, so from 7 to 8, I'm with my family. I've been intermittent fasting, so I typically don't have breakfast. So I'm at my desk by usually 8:10 every morning with coffee, and I usually write from, call it 8:15 to 9:30. And that can be like working on a blog post. Like, for example, today I'm applying to be in a cohort of this coaching program that I'm excited about, and so I spend that hour working on my application. I then use 9:30 to 10:30 to work on the urgent and important stuff that absolutely needs to get done. And then I have like a 30-minute like extra slack from 10:30 to 11, which is anything that it's just extra slack in my schedule. So I can clear out some high priority emails. I can continue to work on whatever blog post I'm writing. It just gives me a lot of flexibility. And so anyhow, I would say those are the habits that are really critical. And the other thing I should say is, while the investing and the coaching right now is I'm largely an army of one, I do get a lot of help in both of those spheres, and so I'm lucky where I have a bunch of support from other friends and those that I think are incredibly smart, whether on the investing or the coaching side. And then on the founder library side, we have a small team of, it's by no means is it a company, but we have a team of contributors. And so I'm working with, a head of product, who's a full stack developer, and also a head of community and content. And she's also part-time. And so anyhow, to me, it's, yes, the habits matter, but I also get a lot of support from other people in these domains.
It's interesting. As you're talking, I'm thinking like, all right, like I want to dig more into that. And then you keep talking. I'm like, all right, there's something else I want to dig into. And by the time you're done, I have like 7 things, and I'm trying to keep them organized in my head a little bit. But I want to start from one of the things you mentioned earlier on, which is meditation being one of the core habits and things that allows you to focus. I've tried it a few times. I definitely believe, that it can work for a lot of people and does work for a lot of people. I haven't found yet. I tend to turn towards it, I think, when I'm down or things are, super busy or in motion for whatever reason, and I kind of feel like I need it, but I've yet to really commit to something super regular. Um, with that said, what is your practice that you have found to work for you, and how did that evolve to what it is?
Yeah, I should start out by saying that meditation isn't a panacea, and it's not for everybody. So I'm not of the mindset that everybody has to do it and that it's gonna solve all of the world's problems. Um,
It's like a 10% happier thing, right? That was I forget who said that. Dan Pink, maybe.
yeah, Dan Harris. Yeah,
Dan
Dan
Harris,
Harris.
yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting. I had really wanted to explore but by the time I got to meditation, I was I was ready for it. I had been effectively smoking uh, weed every single day, basically from the time I was a senior in high school till the point where I was 34, and was definitely using it to self-medicate. And I talk pretty openly about this. I've written about it on my blog. And the thing is I knew, addiction runs in my family, and I knew that even though I wasn't necessarily dabbling with serious substances, that I definitely had the bug. Like, it was very, very, very clear to me that I did. And so there was a moment where I had been trying to quit for a long time, and in this moment, I was like, I'm willing to try anything. And um, I went away to France for my brother-in-law's wedding. I guess this was in 2014, the summer of 2014, so over 6 years ago. And I read the book. I stumbled on the book in the Amazon, in the Kindle bookstore, the Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and it just like completely knocked me on my ass, because it occurred to me that, you know, I was either living in the past or living in the future, and it was very rare for me to actually like stop and fully be present and aware with what my experience was. And so I tore through the book, and I came home and I called my friend Sydney, who had a daily meditation practice, and I said, "Hey, Sid, I know you have a serious meditation practice. I would love to learn. How can I don't know very much about it." And she said, "You're never going to guess this, but a friend of mine is actually who lives in San Francisco. She's a meditation teacher, and she's actually coming to New York for the next week, and she's staying with me. Let me see if she's willing to sit with you." And so one thing led to another. Her friend came to New York, and I sat with her for about an hour and a half to 2 hours for 4 days in a row. And she basically taught me Vedic meditation, which is effectively transcendental meditation. It's a mantra-based meditation. And it was the first time in my life where my mind quieted, B, that I was really present, and C, I felt when I actually transcended very quickly and you know, it's hard to describe it unless you've experienced it, but you know, when you transcend, you start to feel like you're sort of dropping down into your consciousness, and you feel this sense of like expansiveness where you're connected to something bigger than yourself. And so just given that I experienced those three things very quickly, and I was looking for a solution, right? I had a strong motivation to cultivate a practice. And so, and because I'm type A, I just went all in, and I started meditating twice a day for 20 minutes. And then that eventually led me, like, whether I was hungover or, you know, frankly, if I was, you know, stoned, I would still get my meditations in. And just through that practice of like waking up in the morning and not feeling great and being, you know, groggy, it just, and I had some health issues. So, you know, sitting with those health issues like really had me confront like my own mortality and things like that. And just through that process, I was just like, yeah, I want to get sober. And about 9 months later, I got sober. And then when I left RRE, I took some time off. In addition to training to be a coach, I went and I sat in a 10-day silent Vipassana retreat, which was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. Also, one of the most expansive. And that was when I started to really transition from TM to Vipassana, which is more of like a mindfulness-based meditation. And now I practice shamatha meditation, which is basically a very rigorous form of just following the breath. And again, there's some similarities with Vipassana, but I would just say out of anything that I've done, meditation has just changed my life in so many ways. Like I think back to it, it was like started meditating, 9 months later, I quit my job. Got sober. I eventually quit my job. I became a coach. I started my own business, you know, and now I'm here. And I think about that path, and I honestly don't believe that I would have achieved and made these decisions if it weren't for the meditation, because it allowed me to actually get really quiet and start to listen to like what it allowed me to get to like really know those voices in my head, like all those different parts. And it also allowed me to start to like ask these big questions about like, what do I really value? How do I want to spend my time? How do I want to live the rest of my life? What kind of impact do I want to have? And so, you know, I'll end there, but you know, it's been a wonderful journey. And to me, meditation isn't just about, you know, what happens on the cushion or on my seat, but you know, when I'm out there, you know, and it sort of has just been such a game changer for me.
You talked a bit about smoking weed a lot from high school on forwards, and I appreciate your transparency, and will reflect it myself. I smoked starting freshman year of high school summer, so pretty early, and then was doing so consistently. Like I didn't party a whole lot. My high school wasn't like a big party high school. It was pretty small, and people lived far from each other. Went to college and started drinking a lot as well. So I was doing a lot of drinking and a lot of smoking. Uh, and I view them kind of differently. And I'm curious to hear your take specifically on smoking weed. With alcohol, it's like, it's a social thing and you go out and it's fun and everything like that. Or at least when you're young, it can be. And it's not for everyone, obviously. With smoking weed, I thought there was a lot more substance there where um, I actually credit a lot of my open mindedness and sort of calmness and general perspective to having smoked.
Hmm.
And I don't know if there were some negative aspects as well, but really, I've never had any. And some people, like later in life, get sort of anxious smoking weed. I've never had too many negative associations with it. The reason I sort of cooled out was practically when I was heading into banking, I was like, I need to be clear headed. It's just such a left brain occupation that I didn't feel like it would serve me to continue on the path that I was on of smoking relatively a lot. And so
Hmm.
since then, I've been doing it more rarely and in moderation as well as drinking and things like that. Do you look back at smoking as something that was good and bad, or neither, or more one than the other?
Hmm. Yeah, I listen. Some of the best times of my life, I've had so many good moments, in altered states of consciousness over the years, and I don't say that in a boastful way. So like I definitely am not anti substance. Um, Again, like I've had some amazing moments with friends and things of that nature. I also, for a range of reasons, I personally benefited a lot from it at times when at the end of the day, and I just needed to like unplug and start to wind down and even help me sleep, because I've had anxiety over the years. What I found though were a few things, and again, this is just for me. Um, First was towards the end, it was giving me more anxiety than it was like relieving. So I felt that the more that I used it and the older I was getting, the more that it wasn't like I just didn't like the way it was making me feel. So that was the first thing. The second was, for me, I struggle with moderation of anything. You can ask my wife, and so I'm sort of like an all or nothing type of guy. And so for me, I have one speed, and that's go. And so it was very difficult for me to just say like, oh, I'm gonna do it in moderation, because it just that wouldn't have worked with me, and I knew myself well enough to know that I had tried moderation for over a decade, and it just didn't work. And so overall, I actually believe that these substances can be used in a positive way. I think they can expand people's minds if used responsibly and creatively. It just, for me, it was just at a point where I wasn't getting any real benefits from it, and I ultimately decided that this was how I wanted to live the next phase of my life.
Yeah, I think that's admirable for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if by the time I catch up to you, I'm not drinking myself at the very least. It's something that I've already thought about just a couple years out of school and even when I was in it and not like seriously considered it. I didn't, in college, if someone looked at me objectively and most of my friends, like, yeah, we probably have the habits of an alcoholic, but people, that's college. And so I've just realized over time, it's like, what is this actually doing for me? And there's, one thing which is like having it at the end of the day to kind of cool off. I just finished reading Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, which even pushed me further in that direction of
Yeah,
meditation.
sleep is so critical. What's amazing about that, I haven't read the book. I listened to him on Rogan. I took I was driving from Boston back to the city. This is almost a year ago, and I listened to that interview. And it's crazy how important sleep is, and I think it's often the thing that's most neglected by lots of people. But it's such a getting at least 7.5 hours sleep is really, really so important.
So I know we're coming up on time, and I'll finish up shortly, but want to continue on this path with another thing I think you mentioned you started recently, which was intermittent fasting. I've been doing 16 and 8 myself for uh, really like on and off for 2 or 3 years now, but very consistently for the last year on weekdays only. And I think it's awesome. It's like you talked about some of the things that help you add focus, just taking all of the physical eating and the thinking about what you're going to eat and the making of it or picking up of it or whatever it is. You take one of those out every day, and that adds up to quite a bit of time. What has your experience been with fasting, and is it something that you think is going to stick around?
Yeah. So I ultimately decided to try time restricted fasting. I follow, like you, a 16/8 regimen. I decided to give it a try for a few reasons. I think the first is weight loss, which has been shown to work. According to my doctor, he said that it's not any more effective than other weight loss methods, but that it's proven that it can work. So that was the first. The other was to rest my gut, and so to help with gut health, and so that I think those were the two big reasons for giving it a try. What I have found is a few things, and I should start by saying I'm really enjoying it. I find that the first week was incredibly difficult because of the hunger pangs. But now I feel as if I no longer have it or have them, and that they end up a lot of the hunger pangs are just mental, and that over time they just go away, and I don't even think about them. But I think in terms of the benefits, I'm sleeping much better. I have a lot more mental clarity. I'm not snacking as much. So I'm like a big dessert guy. And so at the end of the day, usually at 9 o'clock, I would have like, a bowl of ice cream or a bowl of cereal or something. And so I've basically eliminated that. And I will typically snack in the morning. Like if I'm going downstairs in between meetings, I might grab like a graham cracker with peanut butter or things like that. And so for me, it's just been a really easy way to eliminate food outside of, to eliminate food in that 8 hour window where, I might be snacking on things that I just don't need. And so overall, it's been really solid. I quickly lost almost 10 pounds in a month, which is probably too much. The good news is that in the last, call it 10 days, I've stayed pretty flat at 190 pounds. So I was around 200 pounds. Now I'm at about 190. I want to lose about 5 more, but I'm not obsessed with it. I think one other surprise with fasting was around working out, where I thought that I would need to work out on a full stomach. But what I'm realizing is like if I like last week I got a workout in the morning and didn't eat before or afterwards, and I actually felt amazing. And so I think I'm just realizing that it's a good way to limit the calories that I'm eating, but and I also am someone that loves structure, and so I like discipline in the structure around this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And on the exercise piece, I've almost come to the point where I like can't work out after I've broken the fast. I love working out on an empty stomach, and it just feels a lot more like, I don't know, it's tough to describe, but you said you feel amazing. It's basically probably the best way to describe it for me. And it's not every day, you know, but I just feel like running on a full stomach now. I feel like a slug. But in the morning, I just feel like mentally clear, physically pretty sharp. And it's not a panacea, like you said about meditation, but I think it's a good tool for people to try if they haven't yet. Um, I know we're coming up on time for real now, so I want to give you the last words. Really appreciate you coming on today and had a really interesting conversation. Didn't get to all of the more professional things around coaching and whatnot that I might have liked to discuss with you, but I know there's a number of other podcasts out there. I especially enjoyed listening to one. I think it's called the Patterson podcast with you.
Oh
So
yeah, that
encourage,
was fun.
yeah, encourage people to go out and learn more about you and listen to you. But with that, thank you so much, Slav, for coming on the show today. It was awesome talking with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was fun.